Hello, in this episode of ToThePointCode, we'll be looking at how to use jQuery AJAX in a PHP MySQL project. So what is AJAX? AJAX is an acronym which stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. So AJAX makes it possible to request for data from our server without making any changes to the user interface which is currently displayed. That is, for instance, if we submit a form, the form data will reach the server without actually refreshing the page, meaning that JavaScript will take care of sending data to the server and also fetching data from it, while our page remains intact. So for a PHP MySQL project, and as a matter of fact any other project, you will decide the amount of AJAX that you want to use. At some point, you can make use of just PHP and MySQL without bringing in any JavaScript at all, and that should work fine also. So you can implement AJAX using pure JavaScript or jQuery, but jQuery is the easiest way to do that, so we'll use jQuery. To add jQuery to your project, you need to make use of a CDN or download the jQuery file and add it to our script. So when we visit the jQuery page, we'll have the opportunity to download jQuery or get a CDN which we will use in our project. It's always advisable to go with the latest one available. In this tutorial, I'll go for the minified edition of the latest version. So all we'll do is to copy this script tag and put it in our index.php file. Now let's go back to our code editor. Now I prefer to put the script tag at the end of the index.php file, right after the body. So this will ensure that all our HTML will be loaded before the script tag, which might take a while, is loaded. So right after the script tag, we'll put another script tag. We'll write all our AJAX code in this tag. So the concept is that the AJAX will sit between our front end and our back end. Now for everything in this script tag, we want to ensure that the document has fully loaded before we touch it. And to make sure of that, jQuery has a way of checking if the document is actually fully loaded and ready. To check that, we use document.ready. And for the ready, we pass a function to it. Now once we've done that, everything that we write in this block will run only when the document has fully loaded and is ready. This can be made even shorter by implementing the arrow function, and also a short form for the document.ready. So now all we need is a pair of parentheses and the function in it. The function will be an arrow function, and just like that, it is equivalent to the document.ready that we first wrote. So without wasting much time, let's start with the create. So let's make an alert to ensure that our jQuery is working. Now in the browser, refresh the page. Now we get the alert, which means that everything is working. Now let's handle the create. Now to make everything organized, we want to create another directory and call it server. In this server, we will create PHP files to handle each of the operations. So first of all, we'll create our first file and call it createHandler. Now inside the createHandler, we put the PHP tags. Now if you remember clearly, you create a new record if our submit attendance button is clicked. So now we use the jQuery to listen for an on-click event on the button. That is, if the button is clicked, we want to use jQuery to handle the create operation. So to make it easier, we will attach an ID to the button. In this case, we'll make it the same as the name. Let's give the update button to an ID. We will need it. Our message box has an ID already, so that's fine. Now let's grab the submit attendance button. Now we want to listen for click. On click, we want to handle the event, so we pass the event variable here. Now when the button is clicked, we want to prevent default. That is when you click on the button leads us to another page. But in this case, we don't want that to happen. We want the page to stay the same and no transition or movement. So we use event.preventDefault. So up to this point, let's just save and try in the browser. So now when I click on submit, we see that nothing happens. Usually when I click on submit, the form will be submitted and the message will be displayed here. Now when you click on it, nothing happens. This is exactly what we want. Now once we prevented the default, we want to submit the request using AJAX. And the form we have uses a post method. So we submit the request as a post request. We will do that with jQuery.post. So the first argument will be the link to our server. In this case, we created a server file for our create operation, so we will link to that. Remember, it's in the server directory. Now the second argument will be the data in our form, and jQuery provides an easy way to collect all the data in our form. That is, we will target the form and use serialized array to collect all the data in the form as an array. So to make it easy, you have to ensure that our form has an ID. So we'll give the form an ID of attendance form. So as the second argument, we'll target the attendance form and we'll apply the serialized array method on it. Now the last argument will be a callback function, which will run when the request has been sent successfully. So we'll make use of an arrow function, and this function comes with a result parameter. Now remember that usually when we submit the form for the create operation, a new HTML page is returned. That is the page showing that the attendance has been recorded successfully. Now we've prevented the default operation, so now this new HTML page with all the changes will be returned back through the AJAX. So when this happens, it will be stored in the result variable. So now to display the results to the user, we'll set the content of the body tag to the result that is returned. So to do that, we'll target the body element and we'll use the method .html and we'll pass the result to it. That is, when we do that, the result from the server will actually be returned to the user, but the actual page will not be refreshed. Now let's add the content of the create handler. To do that, we'll go to the top of our file and cut the create PHP section. Once we've cut it, we'll go into the create handler and paste it. Now in this file, we need a connection to our database, so let's copy and paste that too. Now since we are in a new directory, we need to adjust the path to match where the files actually are located. So for the config, we'll go back a directory. For the index.php too, we'll go back a directory as well. Now let's save and try it out in a browser. Make sure to save both files. Now let's refresh the page. on submit, our page turns blank, which means there is a problem, so let's fix it. And that is because in the create handler file, we no longer need to check if the post submit attendance has been set. When we use the serialized array to get the data from the form, the value of the submit button is not added, and therefore the submit attendance cannot be accessed in this file. So we'll go ahead to clear it and just keep the content of it. Once we have done this, it should work fine. So let's go ahead to save and try again in the browser. So now let's enter the details again. Now on submitting, we see that attendance recorded successfully and our list has been updated, all without refreshing the page. Let's try it once again. Once again, attendance has been recorded successfully and our list has been updated. So we are done with the create. Now for the fetching or reading, we'll leave it as it is. There is no need to use the AJAX here, since once the user visits the page, we want the data to be fetched already and not wait for the user to click a button before it is fetched. So we'll move on to the update. For the update, we'll create another file in the server directory and we'll call it update handler. Once again, we'll put in the PHP tags. We also need the connection to the database, so let's copy and paste that from the create handler. Once again, let's copy the content of the update block into our update handler file. We'll cut actually. Now we can get rid of it. Now let's update the various paths that we have. Now for the update ID and arrival time, instead of the get values that we used in the previous episode, we'll convert them to post now to make things a little easier for us, so that we will not be sending two types of requests at the same time. We want to make all of them post requests. So we change the get to post. Also wrap them with HTML special characters. Once we've done that, we need to go and add them to our input fields. So we'll copy the first input and paste it twice. So we'll change the first one to the time. We'll get rid of the placeholder. And for the type, we'll make it hidden, because we don't want it to be displayed to the user for the user to make changes to it. We are only using it to update our records. Now for the value, we'll change it to time as well. For the next one, we'll change it to the update ID. The type will be hidden as well. And we get rid of the placeholder. Remember that the names here should match what we used in the update handler file. Now let's start the handling of the update. So let's go to our script section. Now right after the submit attendance, we'll go ahead to handle the update. Now if you remember very well, our update process is made up of two parts. First of all, you click on update next to the record that you want to update. Secondly, you make the changes and finally click on update to update it. So we'll make use of AJAX to handle these two parts. So first of all, we will handle when update next to the record is clicked. Right now we see that our page refreshes when we do that, and we want to avoid that. So let's go into the code editor and target this update button. Remember, this update is a link tag with a class of update, so we'll use those two to target it. And we'll listen to the click event. Once again on click, we want to prevent default. Now for the first part, which the user clicks on the update button, a GET request is sent to populate the input fields with the data. So we use AJAX to send a GET request. This request will be sent to the href attribute of the A tag. So we use the event variable to access the href attribute of the A tag. We will do that using event.target.href. For the GET request, we don't need to pass any data, so it will be the link and just the callback. So once again, for the callback, we'll update the content of the body with the result. Remember that the single and double quotes can be used interchangeably, and it's fine. So this is the first part. And in the GET request of the update session, I forgot to bring the arrow. So let's do that and save it. Once we do that and refresh the browser, we see that when we click on update, the form data is updated, but the whole page is not refreshed. And that is the same for all our records. You can keep an eye here to see whether it refreshes or not. When we click on any of them, the input data is updated, but the actual page stays the same. And that's what we want for the first part. Now let's move on to the second part, which is handling this update button when it is clicked. We will handle that in the callback of the GET request. If you remember clearly, we gave the update button an ID of update attendance, so we'll use that to target it. Once again, we want to listen for a click event. Once we click on it, we want to prevent default. Now right after that, we will send a post request. We will send this post request to our update handler.php file. So we send it to server/update handler. Now for the values, once again we'll target the attendance form. So we'll copy and paste this code here. Once you have done that, you want to pass a callback. Now once you have the result, you want to do the same thing and replace the content of the body with the result. Now let's save and try it in a browser. First of all, refresh the page. Now let's try to update this record. Let's change the first name to Frank. When we update, we see that the record has updated successfully, but the actual page was not refreshed. Let's try again for another record. And once again, everything works fine without refreshing the page. So we are done with the update. Now let's go ahead to tackle the delete. We will do that right below the update block. So let's find the end of the block and start work. So to start with, let's go to our server directory and create a delete handler. Now inside this file, let's put our PHP tags. Once again, we will need the database connection. Now in the index.php file, let's cut the contents of the delete section. So now at the top, we only have the read section here, which is fine. So in the delete handler, we paste the code and update the path. Now to handle the delete operation, we'll make use of a GET request. So after we send the request to the delete handler, we want to have access to the delete ID here and also the time. So to make that possible, we'll target the part which comes after the question mark of the href attribute. And we can get that by using event.target.search. That will target only the part which comes after the question mark of the href attribute. So let's make the GET request. So once again, we'll target the delete button. And remember that the delete button is an A tag with a class of delete. So we'll use that to target it. Check for the click event. Once we get to the click event, we want to prevent default. Now let's send a GET request. So first of all, we are heading to the delete handler file. Now to make the delete ID and the time accessible using the GET, we'll concatenate those values with a link. So as I said, we will get it by using event.target.search. So we concatenate that with a string here. Before we proceed, let's confirm this quickly from the console. So let me comment this line and console.log the event.target. So now in the browser, let's refresh the page and open the console. On Windows, you can open the console by using Ctrl+Shift and I. So now let's click on the delete. Once we click on delete, we see that nothing happens and our anchor tag is displayed in the console. This browser is not showing all the details I want, so let's try it in another browser. Now in this browser, when we click on delete, we see that the tag once again is being displayed, but now we have an arrow to expand all the properties. Among the properties is the href, which is the full value that we supply to the A tag. Now scrolling down a bit, we can see path name, which targets only the first part of the link. Now moving on, we can see search here, which targets the part starting with the question mark. And this is what we need to send to the delete handler.php file. So now let's close this and get back to the code editor. So let's get rid of the console.log and continue. So once again, this is a GET request, so we will not be sending any other data to it. We'll move on to the callback function. Now in the callback, as we always do, we replace the content of the body tag with the result. Now let's save and try it out in a browser. And when we click on delete, we see that the attendance record has been deleted, but the page was not actually refreshed. So just like that, we've been able to apply jQuery AJAX in our PHP MySQL application. As I initially said, you can use as much AJAX as you want in your application, or you can stick with the basic PHP. The advantage of AJAX here is that it takes care of the request without the need to refresh the current page. Now one last thing we want to do is to change the behavior of our message. We want it to display for a few seconds and then vanish. We make use of jQuery here. Let's go back to our code editor. Now at the bottom, we target the message element. Remember, we gave our message an ID of MSG. We'll make use of the ready method here. This will ensure that once our message displays, whatever we put here will run. So inside this, we'll put a timeout function which will cause our message to fade out. The fade out we have here is a method which comes with jQuery. So with what I've done here, once our message is being displayed, jQuery will wait for 3 seconds and then call our message to fade out. And the fading out process would take 500 milliseconds, which is a half of a second. So let's save it and see how it works in the browser. So back in the browser, let's refresh the page. Now let's try something like an update. Once I do that and update, we see that the message is displayed, and after 3 seconds it fades out. And this is a better experience for the user. So we've seen how to make use of jQuery AJAX in our PHP MySQL project. We are basically done for this series, but in the next episode, I'll add one more bonus series in which we look at how to use MySQL from the command line. We will look at how to run the basic commands by using just the command line. And that's all for this episode. Thanks for watching. Please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode.